Here we go. So hopefully chapter 18, section 2 wasn't trouble for you. Let's have a quick review. First of all, I apologize. I made a mistake. Obviously in the picture, that's not a turkey. That's a turkey vulture. So hopefully you caught that mistake. Types of consumers, they're out of order, so it was a little bit of a trick question. Coyotes are carnivores. Carn means flesh, vor means to eat. Vultures are scavengers. The difference is they don't kill what they eat, they just find already dead stuff. Although, to be fair, coyotes and many carnivores will eat already dead things depending upon how fresh the kill is. And prairie dogs, herb means plant, vor means to eat, are plant eaters. You are neither. You are an omnivore. You are a both eater. You eat both the plants and the flesh. Now, in this food chain, you can see the energy on the left starts with the sun, then the plants, the producers, then herbivores, carnivores, and there could be many, many, many more carnivores, then scavengers, and in the end, recyclers, decomposing fungi and bacteria and things, kind of return some energy back to the beginning to the plants. There are simpler food chains. We have the sun, bamboo, and a panda, and only if it's a cub can it be eaten. Adult pandas, they don't get eaten by anything. When they die, of course, scavengers and decomposers will get to them. Now, food chains are not as awesome as all that. They're really simple and actually also really, really rare. Food webs are trying to show all the complicated energy pathways, all the messy interconnections in an ecosystem. So a food chain is rare because if your one source of food disappears, you disappear. And that is actually why pandas are having trouble. They eat bamboo. As bamboo forests get cut down, pandas disappear. And so there's more than that. Pandas are actually not so awesome at being pandas, and you can watch the video on the blog for more. Now, food webs, they get hyper complicated because most living things eat more than one kind of thing or are eaten by more than one kind of thing. But that complicatedness is more accurate. So later tomorrow, we're going to make a food chain and a food web. So this is one fancy version. Now, to do an energy pyramid, you have to follow instructions. And it tells us that aquatic plants are at the bottom. Now, there's always sunshine first leading into an energy pyramid, which is just a food chain that stood up. So plants first, then insect larvae. You might not know that they eat the plants, then bluegill and bass. So if you didn't know bass were bigger than bluegill, you might have had a little trouble with that. Before we do the math, we already know who's most and least abundant. So the smallest piece is least abundant. That would be the bass, and the most abundant would be plants. And that makes sense. Your top carnivores, there's just fewer of them because there's less food available. Whereas your plants, they have a ton of energy. And so in this case, the plants are going to start out with 10,000 units of energy. Now, each level loses energy as heat. We've talked about that many, many times. And the 90% lost and the 10% kept for the next level is actually pretty close to what happens in a lot of living systems. So 10,000 units of energy, we lose 90% because we use it to build cells and as heat. And so only 1,000 units are left, 10% of the previous total. If we keep going 10% up, we have 100 energy units and 10 energy units at the top. Now, that's not to say that this is always how the math works out. It's not always 90% lost, 10% kept to the next level. But also, it's not to say that energy pyramids only have 4 levels. Let's say an eagle comes in and eats that bass that you were about to catch. That eagle is only going to get 10% or 1 energy unit, which is why eagles are more rare than bass, because they have less energy available to them and less food to get to. Now, the wolves in America, we did our American thing and we murdered them all because wolves tend to eat our sheep and cows and stuff. If you give a wolf a chance between chasing down an elk and, murdering a sheep that just sits there and let it, it'll eat the sheep every time. So we killed them across all the lower 48 states. They were only left in Canada and Alaska. And the elk then became uncontrolled out west, which led to overgrazing. They ate all their food and then they ran out of food and then they would starve. But there were bigger consequences for the rest of the ecosystem as it became unbalanced. When the wolves were reintroduced in 1995 to Yellowstone, of course, the wolf population went up as they started eating the elk that went down. Now, once the elk went down, their browsing or eating of vegetation went down. That allowed tree populations to regrow. If you've ever been out west, there are no branches on any of the trees up to 10 feet where the elk can stand and reach in the snowpack. So aspen, cottonwood, and willow all started to grow. And these are especially important for beavers. Beavers can't make dams if there are no trees to build dams with. Beavers on their own are a keystone species, and they create habitat and ponds that allow more fish and birds and many, many other things to show up. Bison also picked back up again because they didn't have to compete with the elk for browsing, and they don't get preyed upon as much by the wolves. I will say coyotes took a downturn. Wolves just hate coyotes. And they just murder them. They don't eat them or anything. They just kill them. So coyote populations go down when wolf populations are reintroduced. Again, it's complicated, but complicated is usually more true. So how does a wolf live? Now, this is not habitat. Habitat is where you live. A niche or niche, you can say it either way, is how you live. So the wolf is a carnivore, a bloody killer. That's how it gets food. They nurture their young. And among carnivores, this is kind of rare. Like LaFonda, who is a carnivore, didn't have anybody take care of her and teach her how to LaFonda and snap. But they also nurture their young in groups. And again, for carnivores, super rare. And those social structures, the top two, they get to mate and have pups. Everyone else helps them raise them. And the bottom wolf on the totem pole, the omega wolf, has to stay home and babysit while everyone else gets to hunt. And they're needed in the food web. They are greatly connected. And we'll get to that in more detail soon. The extra video just highlighted how food chains are pretty simple. The Amoeba Sisters did a great job. Energy pyramids are just standing up a food chain, showing energy loss. And food webs are complicated with a bunch of overlapping food chains, but more accurate. Now, today's work is about keystone species and the wolf. The wolf is definitely a keystone species. So you're going to define that on slide 17, which you can see in the article, or watch this video to get a good definition of keystone species, which has the same meaning as to why we call ourselves the Keystone State. Then you can click that link if you want to go see what's happening to the Yellowstone wolves. And on slide 18, I encourage you to watch that video because the wolves have had a far bigger impact than we ever imagined. We also have a science word today, so I know you're super excited about that. And I hope to see you in our Zoom session today from 3 to 4 p.m. Check Google Classroom for a link. I hope this helps, and I'll see you when I see you.